Hi there. So in this painting review, we're going to look at Johannes Vermeer's painting of Diana and her companions. Okay, so this painting was completed by Johannes Vermeer in 1655 to 1656. And so it also falls into his early work. I think I've read somewhere where they describe this early era of Vermeer's work as his juvenilia, like his juvenile era of the beginning of his career. However, I would say that he he already was an excellent artist at interpreting stories, providing his own internal, like his own unique slant on the interpretation and narrative of his work. So this painting is another larger piece. It is 38.5 inches tall by 41 inches wide. And it follows the Roman god Diana or Diana. In Greek mythology, that would be Artemis. She was a virgin, the god of the hunt and of chastity also. And she would be followed by her companions. Sometimes they'd be called nymphs, sometimes not. And one of the things that I want to talk about this painting is that historically, when you have had paintings of Diana, they were often there's two scenes in particular that they always seem to have paintings of Diana. One is when Diana bathing with her nymphs, and essentially the hero Actaeon intrudes on their bath and sees her and her nymphs in dishabille, and she reacts violently by turning him into a stag to be forever hunted. And then, or the other one that's tended to also be seen in like art, in the art world and everything, was there's two. It follows the story of Callisto, who was one of Artemis Diana's nymphs, and Callisto got seduced by, depending on, are you following the Roman mythology, which is Jupiter, or Zeus, depending on who, if that's Greek, but essentially Jupiter, the deity, Zeus deity, he transformed himself to resemble Diana, and then he proceeded to seduce Callisto, and so there are several paintings of Diana as Jupiter as Diana seducing Callisto, for the scene where Diana and her nymphs or her companions are in Bath, but Callisto's pregnancy is being discovered, and not very well. Diana was not a very understanding leader of her band of companions. She exiled Callisto, and I'll just carry on and talk about that myth of Callisto real quick. Callisto, she gives birth to her son Arctus, and then shortly after she gives birth, Juno, who's the wife of Jupiter, or Hera, the wife of Zeus, got really angry and turned her into a bear. And so she was forever destined to roam the woods as a bear. And then 16 years later, her son Arcus is out hunting and nearly shoots his mom. And instead, the gods intervene and they put her into the constellation, and she is Ursula Major, the sign. And then her son goes in as Ursula Minor. So that is, but this does not follow either of those typical mythological storylines that usually are presented in art for when we have a painting of Diana. Instead, this one is a more quiet, meditative painting of Diana being washed, her feet are being sponged off by one of her attendants. And it's very quiet and it's very sedate, and it's very also, there's a lot more chastity, or not as much skin is being shown, and it is a beautiful painting. And so that's kind of the narrative of the story, and what it makes, like, that's what makes Vermeer paintings, I think, so wonderful, is that he'll take a common theme like Diana and her companions, but instead of following the typical tropes of like when Actaeon's caught sneaking and and peeking on during their bath, or the Callisto storyline, this one is a totally quiet domestic scene. It falls into it. It very well could be like a genre painting of mythology, because it's very quiet and domestic. So let's look at this painting compositionally and for painting wise. So first off, this painting was painted on, it had an off-white ground that includes chalk, lead white, and umber, and a little bit of charcoal black, which is just our old, like your vine charcoal. And the whole painting, except for where the sky is, it has a transparent additional, like imprimatura, another a reddish brown layer that is used for most of the halftones and the shadow shapes on the faces of the ladies. There's also the composition. This is one of his early paintings, so he left signs of how he did his underdrawing too. And there's a dark brown, so probably like an umber brushwork, where it shows through where he outlined the composition. And there is still some pentimenti, which is a ghost-like underdrawings that sometimes come through with oil painting. And why is that? Oil painting, when you lay down oil on a canvas, and you're using opaque pigments. But if, say, it's got a pretty large ratio of oil to the opaque pigment, when it goes down, it looks opaque. But the wonderful thing about oil paint is that it takes about 5 to 6 years to cure, and then it will actually continue to cure. And that paint passage that had half like oil medium and the opaque pigments, that it goes down opaque, but as it cures and ages, it actually starts to gain translucency. And when you're painting, that term, I use the term in my classes as that you're laying down an opaque glaze. Yes, it goes down opaquely, but you're painting it in such a way, knowing that in like 5 to 6 years, you will start getting some translucency. That's what makes like a Joshua Reynolds painting so wonderful, and Constable, like almost all the great artists that paint indirectly. Their paintings have that lush luminosity and like a nuanced depth, and that is because of the use of these opaque glazes for passages. And then if you have a pretty strong underdrawing, and then you've changed the composition some, you're going to have that pentimenti showing up, where you get that ghosting of a hand or whatever. And so some of that shows through. So like, for example, I want to zoom in on this painting. Because you can see it here. So Vermeer laid down a dark under, like, imprimatura layer. And you can see it here too. So like right there. And that's the underpainting. Hey, sweetie. You can see the underpainting that Vermeer laid in, and then he laid paint on top of his setup. And you have various different thicknesses of opacity going into the painting. And like all of the faces are in shadow, which makes it a much more contemplative composition. And then like here, if we zoom in, you can see that umber, the brown underpainting that he used to put in the composition. That might have been heightened, but a lot of it is original, is part of the underpainting. Another thing, let's look at the composition. The composition is a really nice composition. And again, we have some wonderful diagonals that are being supported. Love that dog. And then we have Diana's in the middle. And then, and we've, the figures are placed very like in lovely important spaces of the composition. One thing I read also is that in 1664 was the big magazine explosion that killed a ton of people in Delft, including Carlos Fabricius, which was a friend of Vermeer's and one of the very talented students of Rembrandt. And this painting may have been also a commission. It's not known like why Vermeer chose to paint this. However, one of the things that I read about this painting was that potentially it was kind of hearkening to kind of the feelings of introversion and contemplation that Delft was going through as in the aftermath of that magazine explosion. And, there's something to be said about that, because a lot of his paintings in this era deal with like the martyrdom, like Saint Praxedis, of her tending to the wounded, or the martyred, which would have been also very much a big part of the zeitgeist of what was going on in emotionally as Delft rebuilt after that magazine explosion. And then one of the things about this painting too that I forgot to make a comment on is that it also harkens very much towards the Christian idea of Mary Magdalene washing the feet of Jesus, but instead in this position we have the handmaiden of Diana with doing that, tending to Diana. Okay, that's the composition for today. I want to actually point out one more thing. So let's look. So there you go. You can also see some of the more of the underdrawing, but I want to talk about again, that blue is probably your ultramarine blue because it's a much more vibrant blue. This blue here is more likely smalt blue, which is pulverized cobalt blue. And there, I remember reading something, and let me find it real quick. I read it. Oh yeah. So in the flesh tones, all the flesh tones in the shadow shapes, Vermeer used blue smalt to create his shadow shapes. And because it's pulverized cobalt glass, it has a translucency to it that lends itself to being shadow shapes. And so all of the shadow shapes in the flesh tones have a little bit of evidence of the smalt in it. And even in his early phase, Vermeer was a master at simplification and organization of light and dark. Look how delicate. You've got, that's yellow ochre, it looks like. You got the blue smalt. Then you've got another slight layer that's kind of, and then you've got, let's look. The face is made up of multiple layers. So this is your underpainting, and that looks like that was laid in originally. And then for flesh tones, it looks to me as if we have this area was either heightened with a little bit more like a red ochre or red earth. And then, well, those are almost the same pigment. And then you have the smalt, but obviously Vermeer later in the composition of the painting realized that maybe the forehead needed to be like have a little bit of reflected light. And he laid over, it looks like a yellow ochre, glaze. Unfortunately, as it aged, it didn't seamlessly combine as well, but that's okay. In other areas, he did such a great job, but you can see the passages. And then he laid down some flesh tone that had kind of more, it was probably more of if it was smalt, and like some of his, it's like, what is it? You can do Red Lake or vermilion, like your reds that stay and are in light fast were your vermilions. The Red Lakes, the Rose Matters, those are vegetable organic pigments, and they fade and fail with time. But then you have this transition right here, where I bet that is some of the warm ochre underpainting. And then he spreads over. He spreads, and then we have the flesh tones, and these go down more opaquely. That's like lead white with tin yellow, lead white with a little bit of vermilion. And then that's how we get those wonderful flesh tones. Yeah, very nice. Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you.